Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the release of Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, and it is actually doing better than projected. But because of a massive budget, I think right now it's pretty easy to say the film will probably end up being a massive flop, even though, again, it is doing better than projected, and it is still early. It's only been the first weekend, and the word of mouth is pretty strong for the movie. That being said, this type of start is not the kind of start you want to have when you have a budget of $150 million, especially when you take into account the worldwide numbers. So we'll talk about that and why I think it's going to end up being a flop. And we'll also talk about the second weekend numbers for John Wick Chapter 4 and why the worldwide numbers especially pose this film having a very good chance of being the highest grossing of the franchise, even when you adjust the numbers for inflation, and also being a very successful film financially to boot, likely making upwards of $100 million in net gain profit. So we'll talk about that and a bunch of other things as well. Before we get any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, lap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on. That way you know every time the video live stream goes live on the channel. A blessed Palm Sunday to everyone out there. And as we begin this Holy Week, I pray that the end of your Lenten season can be incredibly fruitful. So first off, we'll start off with the headline from Deadline, as I like to say, from Tony over at Deadline. Dungeons & Dragons locks up 38.5 opening. Is this enough to start a franchise? And I can answer that with no. It's not enough to start a franchise, at least right now. Again, this might be the type of movie where it ends up doing better than expected box office-wise, still ends up losing money, but because it had good word of mouth, is able to have like a second life, as it were, on physical media, and from there maybe be able to justify a sequel. Right now, though, not looking like it's going to be nearly enough. As we have here from Tony, Paramount's Honor Among Thieves, Dungeons & Dragons, is settling at a $38.5 million opening weekend after a 15% decline on Saturday of 13.1. North of the $30 million tracking, it's still below the $40 million number that they had projected after the Thursday numbers came in. As it says also, the global is better than we expected at $71.5 million, but they had pegged it to be at $65 million, so it's not that much of an increase, with offshore territories delivering $33 million from 58 markets. Does this opening rep the start of a franchise? Stateside D&D outperformed its tracking over the past month and still did not gross enough. However, the picks hold will be critical going forward. And here's the thing, and here's where I would disagree. They're trying to, again, say there's still hope. There's still hope for the film. And I'm here to say I just don't think that hope is realistic. They, I think, have a good point just by this one image alone. You have Super Mario Brothers movie coming out this weekend, right? You have it actually coming out early because of Easter. And so you have it coming out, I believe, on Wednesday, which means, and actually it looks like you have Tuesday night opening nights for the film. So it comes out wide on Wednesday with Tuesday night early showings. So you're looking at this film, and I honestly believe that this movie will be incredibly successful. I don't think it's going to make $1 billion, and many of you already know my stance on that. But again, I want to just reiterate a couple things. I do believe that this is the case for a couple of reasons. One, because it's the first in this franchise. Yes, you had a Mario film back in the 90s, but that was basically it. And what I think that film especially showed is just because you have a lot of people who are fans of a game does not mean that people are going to cross mediums. Look at almost any video game adaptation. Even the ones that are a little bit better, they don't automatically have the same number of sales or the same amount of money made when you cross into different mediums and different platforms, like a video game going into a movie. And so I still think it's going to do well. If the film is really, really good, then obviously that's going to change things quite a bit in my early projections. But as of right now, I can see this film doing easily $800 to $900 million. I think that's going to be a bare minimum and has the potential to make $1 billion, sure. But as of right now, I'll have to wait for actual numbers to come in before I think that that is a possibility. But this is, I think, going to be the ultimate Achilles heel for Dungeons & Dragons, because even though the audiences are not exactly going to be the same, there's no denying that when the Super Mario Brothers comes out, guess what happens? That film takes over all of the IMAX screens, or the vast majority of them, all of the Dolby Cinema screens, all of the Big D films, all of the Cinebox, like all of the major premium format screens are going to be going to Universal, are going to be going to Illumination, are going to be going to the Super Mario Brothers film. And so that means it's going to have to make a lot of headway in those regular 2D showings and those regular, standard format screens. So does it have a chance? I mean, technically any film has a chance, but again, the numbers are not trending high enough for me to think that the film has any chance of being able to hit its break-even point because of the $150 million budget and because the marketing campaign for the film was not good. People are, again, going to see the film and are surprised at how good it is, and that is, again, a good thing because it means you make a little bit more money, more people go to see it, you have good word of mouth, but because you don't have that initial push to really get it out there, especially with the one chance you have to make the most money possible, which is your opening weekend, yeah, I just don't see the possibility of it going forward, and we'll break down those numbers, and hopefully you can see why I think that it's very unlikely for the film to be able to pull that off. Talking, though, about the film, it did make $38.5 million domestically with about almost $10,000 per screen, so a pretty decent per-screen ratio there. John Wick Chapter 4 did drop to the number 2 spot this week, dropping 62%, but still made $28.2 million because it had a very big opening weekend. Also was able to outdo many people's thoughts and projections on what they thought the film was going to do. Has easily crossed the $100 million mark domestically, and really because especially of the international numbers for the movie, has gotten to the point where $400 million, I think, is definitely a strong possibility now for this movie, especially when you look at the overall projections. If you guys also just compare these two films, right, in the second week of its release, John Wick Chapter 4 is not too far off, right? It's about a $10 million difference between these two movies. They're in the same number of screens, and then look at that per theater ratio. It's not as much as one would suspect, and so I think that at least for Dungeons and Dragons to be as successful as it would need to be, so because of that, John Wick Chapter 4 is definitely still taking up the minds and hearts of a lot of people, as the film is absolutely fantastic. The film His Only Son had a debut this week from Angel Studios. This tells the story of Abraham and Isaac from the Bible, coming at around 1,900 screens, so a relatively wide release there, only making $2,700 per screen. So I've seen much better per theater ratios even at less screens for other biblically inspired stories or other Christian oriented stories. So I'm not interested in this at all. The poster alone I think is so poorly done, it just makes me not interested in going to see it, let alone the trailer. So yeah, if this is a film that you wanted to see or you did see and you liked, hey, 5.3 million definitely is not terrible. But again, I'm not going to be able to really break this film down because of just the fact that it's not really a wide release in the same respect as other films. And I tend to need those wide releases to be able to fully do accurate breakdowns. I try to keep those off my chart as much as possible because I had to put in a lot of not available, and it just make things messy. Coming in the number 4 spot though is Scream 6 at $5.3 million, making around the same amount of money. So as you can see, the actuals will definitely be able to determine which film is the true number 3 film. But right now, because of these being estimates, you're seeing the numbers coming in this way. We also have Creed 3 coming in the number 5 spot at $5 million, a 39% drop. And again, has not been out for too long at this point, but still in the 4th or 5th weekend release, so still doing pretty well, adding to its overall numbers. Shazam! Fear of the Gods, can't say the same thing, dropping another 49%, dropping out of 600 plus screens, only at 4.7 million, and it's not doing much of anything internationally. I think it added a total of like 7 million or so from last weekend to this weekend. So this film is pretty much done. There's already the talk of this film being released on physical media very soon and also digital platforms very soon. So I think Warner Brothers is trying to save as much face as possible, but this film is easily going to be a $100 million flop, I think, at least. Another film also that had a much smaller release than that, this is also why this would not also be on my chart either, as His Only Son. This film, 1001 at 926 screens. Again, only about $1,900 per screen. So overall, not enough money there to be able to really do full breakdowns of that film. The film 65 dropping the number 8 spot here, $1.5 million, so a 51% drop. So not enough. Again, this film has not been able to do as well. I know some people really enjoyed it. I personally did not. I thought it was just very bad CGI and not a very compelling story, very boring. And it looks like a lot of people probably felt the same way, as the film is not set to make its money back. And the Watch Quantumania, also just a really terrible movie. Still also showing itself to be a flop for Disney. You're looking at the very least around 20 to 100 plus million dollars of a flop for Disney for an MCU film, for the one that sets up the villain of the future of the MCU as well. Yeah, danger signs should be there for Disney executives, but are they going to actually do anything? No, they're going to fire 7,000 random employees, but they're not actually going to fire the people who they should be firing, who are running these different industries, whether it be Marvel or whether it be Star Wars. And then coming in the number 10 spot is Jesus Revolution, making another $1 million there. So this film, again, has pretty much made all it's going to make, but still in the top 10 nonetheless. Going a further deep dive into these numbers, Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, as you can see, only made $71.5 million internationally. And again, at a $150 million budget, 2.5 to 3 times the budget is the break-even point for films. You can see, hopefully, already, even before getting into the charting, why this film has a long way to go. If you actually compare this, you can see it's only made 0.5 times its production budget. That is not a good place to start. It's better than expected, but with the competition set to come out this week as well with the Super Mario Brothers movie, amidst the fact that it's just not a lot of money in the first place, let's just say that it's slim to none that this film is going to be able to make its money back. I will of course eat crow and have egg on my face if this film ends up, pulling out one of the greatest comeback stories of all time. But even with the strongest legs possible that I think a film like this could get, I just don't see the possibility with the fact that it's just not really doing much of anything either domestically or internationally. Then we get into John Wick Chapter 4, which is at $244.8 million. So very impressive numbers there. Though it will be interesting, as I've mentioned this previously, to see where this film ends up being opposed to John Wick Chapter 3, because right now John Wick Chapter 3 is the highest grossing film of the franchise, but Chapter 4, at least at this point in time, is set to be able to do pretty darn good. As you can see, it's already 2.4 times its budget, meaning the film is essentially broken even. So as of this weekend, and once those actuals come in, or at the very least once the Monday numbers come in, I think that this film will easily be able to pass up its break-even point, and that means that this film is going to have all profits going into the Easter season and going into the following weeks after Easter Sunday, going further into the Easter season as well. And so, yeah, definitely a good look for this movie, and I think that this film has a lot to be excited about, and a lot to be further looking into. Going ahead and comparing this film to the other films in the franchise, we'll go ahead and do this live. Remembering that the adjusted for inflation numbers for the numbers does not keep with the current rate of inflation, but still is a good metric nonetheless. As you can see, the domestic opening for the film, even for adjusted for inflation, was indeed the highest grossing of the franchise. When you look at worldwide box office, as you can see, it has easily passed that of the first John Wick film, easily passed that of John Wick Chapter 2, and even with a correct adjustment for inflation number, it would still have passed this film, whereas it is yet to pass the number for John Wick Chapter 3. So this film, at $373 million, probably closer to $380, $385 when you adjust for inflation, is really going to be the film that this has the best comparison to, because, as you can see, the $122 million domestic versus the $195, $122 international versus the $178, these are going to be the closest numbers as far as the films and the franchise are concerned. So that's why I think right now the film has a chance at $400 million, but it has to be able to continue to perform well, especially in the midst of competition, just like Dungeons & Dragons has the competition coming from the Super Mario Brothers film. John Wick Chapter 4 will also have that competition as well. And I did point this out on this past Sunday stream. As you can see, the film ended up actually doing worse in certain regards, again, not by a whole lot, but by enough in its first week of release compared to that of John Wick Chapter 3. And it has been able to make that up as of this weekend. But notice, again, the numbers aren't all that bit different, right? 7.8 versus 7.5, 12.3 versus 10.2. And on the Sunday, the projection for John Wick Chapter 4 is 8, whereas the third film made 10. So as you can see, 122 is where currently John Wick Chapter 4 is. At the same point in its release, that film, John Wick Chapter 3, was at 115. So not a whole lot of difference between them. And so that's why I'm going to be following these numbers going forward, because will it be able to have close to the $7 million second Monday numbers? Will it be able to have a $3.6 million Tuesday? Remembering that, again, that's going to be the opening night for Super Mario Brothers film. So that's going to be interesting to follow as far as these films are concerned. That being said, I still do think the film is tracking well enough to be able to, at the very least, end around where Parabellum did, but still an interesting contest between those two films nonetheless. Going into His Only Son, $5.3 million. Again, look at that poster. It doesn't look good. It just doesn't look good. It looks like he's wearing a prosthetic, or they did something in Photoshop. It just doesn't look good at all. So I have no interest in seeing the film, and if that makes you sad, I'm sorry. Scream 6 at $147.5 million, continuing to add to its profits. Same thing with Creed 3 at $258.5 million. So even though I don't think the film's very good, can't deny the fact it is still doing quite well. Shazam! Fury of the Gods at $119.5 has no prayer of getting to $200 million. And yeah, not a good look whatsoever. Looking at $100 million flop for Warner Brothers once again. It's had way too many flops to, again, I don't know who needs to get fired at this point, but clearly someone needs to get fired and something needs to be shaken up, because what they have right now is not working. The new film 1001 at $1.8 million, just thought I'd mention it. 65 at $54.7 million, again, not nearly enough. Ant-Man and the Wasp at $466.9, so as I mentioned previously, no chance of it getting to $500 million, meaning this film is a massive flop. Jesus Revolution at $50.8 million, so doing pretty well there. Going into the charting, because we love Chotzi on OMB Reviews, here is the reason why I do not think Dungeons & Dragons has a good chance of breaking even. Right now, it's at $71.5 million. That means right now it's at $182 million in the red. The reason why is because with a budget of $150, you're talking about a total cost with marketing of around $225 roughly, meaning the break even at 2.5 times its budget is $375 million. So the film needs to make $375 to break even, and that is a much more conservative estimate, right? Some charts might have it closer to 400, even 425 million as a break even. Starting off worldwide at 71.5, even if the film has a very strong hold from week 1 to week 2 and does well over does well over Holy Week, does well even into the Easter weekend, you're still looking at this film not being able to, again, even with the strongest holds, be able to get anything, north of probably maybe it'll get to 150 million, max $200 million by the end of next weekend. And if that's the case, it would then have to continue those legs going all the way for the entirety of its release just to be able to get to that $400 million or so number. And I just do not see that as being a possibility. It's too steep of a hill to climb. And again, some of you might disagree with that, but based off of the numbers, that is all that I can really say about it. Different story for John Wick Chapter 4. With the $244 million, it is right on the cusp of its own break-even point of $250 million. Again, within the next day or two, it'll hit that number. Right now, though, with that, based off of historical standards, I am projecting the film to be somewhere around 350 to 490 by the end of its run. So it would have to have incredible legs, which right now, based off of the 62% drop from week 1 to week 2, doesn't seem likely to happen, but again, it's still a possibility. So I think that this film will probably end up, if I had to guess, somewhere between 350 and 400 million, and I'm leaning more towards the $400 million number. So I do think the film will end up, even when you adjust for inflation, being the highest of the franchise, though not the highest grossing compared to its budget, because this film did cost twice as much as all those other films. And so even if it does perform a little bit better than that of John Wick Chapter 3, because that film cost half as much, you see ultimately higher profits going to that of the third film. Still, it is still expected to make decent money. $59 million minimum to $140 million as a maximum. So I think that it will probably end up being around that $100 million in net gain profit. So again, a very good return on investment there, not only making their money back, but also making $100 million in profit. Definitely something for them to be happy with. As you can see, only about $3 million in the red at this point in time, and at 2.4 times its entire budget. We did have also updates for Shazam 2 at $119.5 million. This film, oh boy, yeah. After 3 weeks, not looking good. It's barely adding any money. There's a good chance that this film will actually end up north of $100 million as far as a financial loss is concerned. Either way, it is a giant flop for Warner Brothers. Scream 6 is still adding to its profits at around $36 million in net profits. 65 at $54.7 million worldwide means the film is at $34 million in the red. So even though it is still legs-wise, it's probably going to do a little bit better than the worst-case scenario. It's not going to be enough for it to make its money back. You also have other films that was able to update. The Creed 3 at $258 means that this film probably will end up getting at least $50 million in net gain profit, which means it'll get somewhere around the average of what is historically expected. And so again, not doing really crazy numbers in comparison to other historical metrics, but still well enough for the film to definitely, again, be adding to its overall numbers. And then the last two films I was able to update were Jesus Revolution, which is now at $8 million in net gain profit. And as you can see, it's starting to get pretty close to having very, very good legs. Whereas Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is likely going to be a chart breaker in the negative direction, meaning the film not only will be a box office flop, but will also have some of the worst legs of not just any MCU movie, but of a lot of films in recent years. And so, with all that being said, though, those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves has the ability to make its money back? Based off of everything that I'm seeing, I don't see it as a possibility. Again, $182 million in the red as a starting point is not a good look. It's not a good start, especially when your numbers are as low as they are worldwide. So does it have a chance? Sure, any film technically has a chance, but is it likely? I just don't see it as a possibility, especially with competition coming this week from Mario. John Wick Chapter 4, I do have a question about that. Do you think that film is going to be able to beat John Wick Chapter 3? As I mentioned, using the, again, I want to at some point do a further breakdown of these numbers for the actual rate of inflation. But with that being said, there is still a good chance that even with that being the case, the film has a good chance of being able to pass that of Chapter 3, since this film doesn't have that much extra money to add on to it, since this film came out in 2019. So rate of inflation is not going to impact this one as much as it would a film for 2014 or 2017. But also, what are your thoughts? Another question for the comments. What are your thoughts about John Wick Chapter 4? Do you think the film is going to be able to be the highest grossing of the franchise? Do you think it's going to be able to get to that $400 million mark? I do think it's possible, but I would love to hear your thoughts about that. And anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, slap that fire button, Aussie, and smash the rumble button as well. Hope you all had a blessed Palm Sunday, a blessed rest of your Holy Week, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members who are at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illick, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can check out over at his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel at Eagle Writer, and Miss Modern Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star people, we got Matt317, check him out on his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and the K-Man, and you can check out the K-Man over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, check out the top link in the video description below to join the Keeper of the Bifrost level. You also get access to other things like a podcast that I do every month with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, and also I do giveaways for my Keeper of the Bifrost level people and above, and also my Chosen of Valhalla monthly stream. If any of that stuff sounds interesting, especially those giveaways, which I do give away 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff all month long, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Easter, and as always, God bless.